folks in here, I see. But this is my youngest son, Kenneth. And then I've got grandchildren, Alex and Audrey and Ellery and Riley. Bradley back here and his wife, Savannah. Lots of kinfolks. Got a niece here, Carrie. And, but what we're gonna try to do is to talk to you. My entire life, I heard about this from my daddy, Harold's uncle. Harold's my first cousin. He was raised on the old place there where I was, and I heard it from them. He heard it from his mama, who heard it from her daddy, who heard it straight from John Kay. This happened in 1840, and a band of Creek Indians, and of which, it was what was done to the Native Americans and the Indians was horrible and terrible. Every treaty that the United States government ever made with them was broke, and this band of Indians was starving too. And so they raided down in Liberty County and up into Gadsden County. And John K. McLane was just a teenager. He was my great-great-granddaddy, twice removed. And Harold's great-great-granddaddy, twice removed. And Larry and some of their folks, we was trying to figure out a while ago. I think that, anyway, I descended through Alexander McLane, which was his son. And then Alexander's daughter, one of them was Della McLane, that married my grandfather, Obie Edwards. And so that's how I come to the to be kin. Of course, would be my children's great-grandfather 3 times removed. And so there's lots of stories been told. We're going to try to tell you. A lot of this is taken from the interview that was done way back in the early 1900s. I'm not sure of the date. Jane's probably better at that than me, but 1902 he is. And but then a lot of it was just passed down by our ancestors, wasn't it, Harold? Yeah. Straight eyewitness account from John Kay. Some of the things you see over here, and Kenneth's probably going to cover it, are you?
Yes.
One thing I will say is out there in my car, if you see that drawing over there, it's faded. Jane and them have it under museum glass now. When he was older, in his later years, the old man that was involved in this raid, John Clay, drew that to depict what had happened on that day. It shows the woods and the Indians coming out and them burning the house. Shows a blacksmith shop. Shows an anvil under it. I've got that anvil in the back of my car out there. And we're going to take it down to the diesel house for them to put in the other. That was one of the only things that they couldn't tote off on that day. They were starving, they were hungry, they toted off the food. But, Harold, I'm sure when you was young, you seen that old anvil sitting there at Grandma and Granddaddy's. Yeah. And Harold's seen it a many times. So, all of these artifacts Kenneth will touch on. There's a lot of stories that goes on. I read a story here not too long ago. Some medium or whatever they call themselves on Facebook said that they had been down there years back and where it was at and at night and hell seance and there was all kind of spirits and this and that and the other down there. And I don't know. What they probably heard was hoot owls.
That was the Big Ben ghost hunter.
Yeah. Okay. Is that what that was? And we don't know when they were there or what happened. We do know that many years ago, those lighter knots were long knots. Those are the actual knots that were used to bring the babies with. They were longer and larger knots, and they were in the old monument down there. There's a concrete monument erected by S.W. Anderson and somebody else. And it had tempered glass on both sides, and it was reinforced with steel rods in there. And somebody broke that out to try to steal them. Well, I read on Facebook this week that somebody had put on there that those were stolen many years ago. Well, Harold knows it wasn't stolen. That grandma and granddad then went down there and got her granddad. Some of them got them out, and they've been in the family ever since until they were brought over here to the museum. But it wasn't. So there's many stories going around. We're just gonna try to get back and tell you what actually happened on that day that was in the interview and was passed down from year to year, generation to generation, such as your African storytellers, your Native American storytellers. That's how they pass their information and stories down. And that's how this has been passed down by members of the family, of which I think half the people here today just about it are. So I'm going to turn it over to Kenneth. I'm going to hush because I like to talk, if y'all hadn't figured that out already.
Well, my part of the story picks up with Granddaddy Edwards. I grew up right there on Shorty Edwards Road. And if you all, who knows where Shorty Edwards Road is at, right across from Pine Grove Church. This all happened right at the end of that road. If you drove down to the end where Grandma and Granddaddy's house, old house is at, about 300 yards past that, there's kind of a clearing, and that's where the 12 by 15 cabin sat. And by the time Granddaddy was a young boy, 1930s or so, he was born in 22. Nothing but you could just kind of tell where the base of the cabin sat, and that's how we even know where the house was at, because by the time we had come along, it was gone. But you're talking about back in the late 1800s, when nothing that you see here looks like it was, or looks like it does now. Everything was just pines, tall pines. There was no undergrowth. Old natural Florida looked nothing like all of this does. And I mean, even down into, if you go down into the creeks, way down into Toloja Creek and the creek beds, where even now they couldn't log. You couldn't get logging equipment in there. There's old stumps where all of that's been logged. Everything around here, there's nothing original to the way it was then. And the story, I think most of us have probably read it, but to hit the high points, they moved down. John Kay was born in Savannah. I think there was 4 brothers, and that group moved down here in the 1820s, I believe, 1820s, 1830s, 1837 maybe. My dates get kind of crossed up. I'm 40 now, so don't let Dad tell you about my memory. Also, I'm a little bit nervous. I'm usually talking to 8th graders, 7th graders at best, and where I don't know parts, I can fill it in, and they just believe me. But he moved down, and it's slim pickings around here. I married a lady. My wife's from Bluntstown. I had to move from Bristol across the bridge, and you just didn't do that back in the day. But you think back to like way back then, there weren't many folks in these parts. So John Kay's dad had passed away, and his mom remarried his brother. I mean, there wasn't nobody else. And so on the day of the massacre, John Kay's stepdad was going to Quincy using the old Federal Road, and at that time, if you're reading the story, it's fascinating to me that we're only a couple generations removed from the old original roads that were put in by General Jackson. That just blows my mind.
Can I say
Yeah,
a word
go
to
ahead.
you? The old Federal Road went right through there, and right down below where Hooser and them's house is. Harold, I'm sure, has seen it, and I have too. Harold, when I was just a young one, they was still timber going across that creek. Harold seen it too.
We used
Y'all
to swim right there.
seen it
Me and
too.
Danny used to swim right there. You could still had some of the
Some of the old timber put there by Andrew Jackson during the Indian War. Put there by Andrew Jackson.
When you say it like that, I mean, that brings back what you said. It's so important to remember these parts of history, because we're actually not that far removed from what seems like in history books so long ago. This is a young country.
Yep.
So on that day, there was word that Native Americans had crossed the Apalachicola River at Bristol there. Everybody was kind of on the lookout, and it's really depicted well in this drawing if you haven't been up and had a chance to see it. John Kay, where his 13-year-old sister was in the pen there. Here's the Indians coming up, and he actually takes a shot in the left shoulder. She makes it in the house, and he does as well, but not before a grazing shot, but still an inch or two to the side, and most of us aren't in here. But they get inside, and while the Native Americans are, of course, like Dad said, they're hungry, so they're cooking. They have a feast, but it goes on for a while. It's not a quick like cooking a side of bacon, like it's a little party for a bit. That's why they call them raiding parties. I mean, once you find a homestead that's got lots of meal and things like that, there was 18 of them, I think, and they cooked and ate all day, and then decided it was time, well, let's just say the massacre part is gonna happen, and John K's mom decided she wasn't gonna just stay there in the cabin and die, and tried to slip out the side, what would have been the east side of the cabin there, and there was an argument that ensued, and he tried to tell her, there's always lookouts, but she took the 2-year-old, the baby, the 13-year-old, and didn't make it very far to the wood line before John K saw the lookouts had spotted him and runs behind them, and he steps out to yell. Bullet whistles by, and he has to step back inside and hears a couple of shots. And where those shots rang out, that is where they would the next day find the bodies of his mom would have been my great grandmother, the 13-year-old sister, and the babies, and that's where the monument stands to this day. It's a nice stone monument, marble top. The last time I was down there, I was with McLane here. There was a group of us that
we need to clean it up and restore it.
And you can still see where the glass was at in it, but it tells a little part of the story. But that is the part, that is the part of Gadsden County where the worst part of this massacre occurred. The 13-year-old sister had long, beautiful hair. She had been scalped. But meanwhile, back at the house, they're trying to burn the house down, and John K actually mentions that it's the first time he ever prayed. In the picture here, you can see where they're throwing cotton bales on the roof of the house, and he prays for help, and the wind turns and
blows the
fire away from the house.
Kitchen was built, back in those days, separate from the house, and so they burned the kitchen, and then it turned into burn the house.
Yep, and they kept blowing the cotton bales off of the house. House was made out of pretty solid logs, and they couldn't get it to catch on fire. And at some point, they start making a ruckus off in the woods, and he's thinking they're trying to get his attention drawn in that direction, and that's what was happening. He's running back and forth, looking back and forth, and I skipped what's probably almost the most tragic part of the story. Is he's aware at this point that most of his family's been massacred, and decides he's not going to let them take him alive, because that usually a pretty bad death back then. So he sets up the table and figures out a way to take his own life, and handgun, so he's going to do it with his long rifle, and sets the rifle up on the table, puts his toe on the trigger, and figures out if he can shoot himself in the forehead should the time come. And when he, he's only a 17-year-old boy, and we don't all run into, can you imagine, we don't all run into situations where you're 16, 17 years old, hemmed up in the house, and a band of pretty fierce warriors are outside and they're after you. So in that commotion of just trying to figure out what he's going to do with himself, he didn't realize he had his rifle cocked, loaded, and was touched the trigger. It was a hair trigger, what most folks call back then, and he had touched it with his toe. It's amazing. And that's one more time. There are a lot of times throughout this story where about half of us wouldn't exist, and things that went just a little bit differently.
Well, there's a lot of places throughout this story where you can see the hand of God.
Amen.
Yes. Yeah. So from there, the ruckus started then, and he thinks they're trying to distract him. And he looks. He's running back and forth, looking out the holes. You always had the musket holes in the cabins back then, because at any time anything could be going on outside. And he sees a warrior jumping from tree to tree. And remember, it looked nothing like this. We didn't have scrub oaks and all this. You could see for hundreds of yards under the pine trees. He's jumping from tree to tree to have cover. And what he's going to do is slip up on that side of the house where they're creating the ruckus over here and set the house ablaze, and either burn him out or burn him up in the house. And so good thing he's hopping back and forth. He sees him coming, lets him get about 20-25 yards away from the house, and puts a charge right into his chest. And about the time he lets it go, the warrior takes a jump and he takes the whole shot. I hate to think about it, right in his guts. So it's not going to be a quick death. That's going to be a slow and painful death in 1840. The next time he sees him, the band has come back and they're helping him over the fence that's in the drawing here, and they hear down in what we called the low grounds when I was growing up, hooting like owls, crow calls, a lot of native sounding burial type ceremonies. And over the years there have been a lot of people that came down there looking for the burial site. It was never found. Now, I don't know if in stories it's always been told that he was buried there somewhere in that creek swamp. I don't know if they carried the body back with them or if that was really a burial ceremony, but if so, they did a fine job of hiding it, which you would expect that they would. But there's been a lot of people searching, it was never found.
We don't know why they did that. I don't think that it was probably common for them to withdraw right then, maybe move him to withdraw right then. It had to be, and Kenneth will touch on that, either the leader of the war party or something for that to
It was the chief's only
happen.
son.
Supposed to be, and yes, sir, we're gonna touch on that too. There's two stories. It was his only son that they said. That's our side of the story. There's another side that we gonna touch on it.
The stepdad asks where his wife and the children are, and John Kay tells him what has happened. And somehow, in amongst all the ceremonies going on, they didn't hear the wagon come back from Quincy. And so another argument ensues, and stepdad decides he's gonna go and hunt for the wife and kids. And he doesn't find them that day, and ends up just hiding between some stumps, some old logs that night. Again,
Slap my hollow
right
log.
here, yeah. And John Kay, meanwhile, takes the horse and rides out to go get help. And about that time, they realize they hear the horse and realize that he's escaping. And a couple musket balls go by, but they weren't real accurate back then. They miss him. But I do find slight humor in the story where he mentions that the horse didn't need any giddy up and go. She sensed the urgency of the situation, and they got out to the next family. Yeah, the Johnsons. Thank you. And from there, they sent word to Jackson Bluff, and they sent out soldiers and a whole party, and they were never found. At that point, you were down to the smallest bands of Native Americans that were still not being removed, and that was what they were good at, was not being found. And they were never located until, of course, now we know where the family is at. But where are they located now? Do you know?
Somewhere in Alabama, aren't they?
I don't know.
Pascagoula.
I don't know. But we have
I'm not sure.
we
As
have
far
his
as I'm
book, so
concerned, we're
we can
still
look it
warring.
up.
I never signed the treaty. No. I'm not sure. I actually just recently learned about that, and think it would be fascinating if
I think they're
two
somewhere in
sides
Alabama.
met up. Dale Cox, lives in Tuag. He's written a lot of historical books, and that's what he does. He travels.
I would like to meet some of the family.
I think that would be.
I think it would be very.
I would like to meet some of them. Of course, they come back after they couldn't catch up with him, and they
Yes.
burned the house. They toted off everything they could tote off. Because it was food. They didn't have any food to eat, much.
Well, and there are a couple of the jugs that you used to have that I think y'all have up at the house now. At least one of them, I think. That I need to bring you a couple. We still have some of the jugs they toted as much as they could tote of the meat and syrups and things like that off. And the farther they got down the creek, the heavier the stuff was getting. And so as they followed them, hunting them, it actually was like a breadcrumb trail for a while, because there'd be a jug and here'd be another, and they would start sitting things down, and those were passed down for years as well. So not just those, but Granddaddy Edwards, it was kind of his life's mission, just keeping all of this alive. And I'm sure some of y'all heard him tell the tale. I think the last time I sat in a room like this, I was about these kids' age, and we were doing it, that little building by the Greensboro post office here. He was telling it, and I think one of the coolest moments of my life, we were all there together. There was tales, and it was another of those folk tales for years about what happened to the gun. What happened to the gun, because he carried the gun in the Civil War, what happened to it. And I spent my teenage years when most people be chasing girls and having a good time.
First of all,
Hunting that
let me
gun.
say this.
Oh, here we go.
No, the Indian that John Kay shot, when he dropped his bow and arrow.
That's in the picture here.
It's in the picture. He dropped the bow and arrow. What picture?
There's a picture of Great Granddaddy
Here it
Alex.
is.
I see it. He dropped the bow and arrow, and so after they burned things, whatever, for whatever reason, they left that. So the family picked up that bow and arrow, and there where I was raised, and at the end of Shorty Edwards Road, if you're in that house, right off to the west of it there was a house that belonged to his son Alexander, and the musket stood behind the door, and the bow and arrow at one time hung over the fireplace, then hung over the door, and that house caught on fire. That the old man in his later years, John Kay, lived there with his son, and that's where my grandmother Della and Harold, you remember that?
Yes, I remember.
Harold's a lot older than me, y'all. Harold's a lot older than me. He can remember that house. And the old house caught fire and burned up. And all that was left was the barrel. Burned up the bow and arrow and the quiver, all that. There was an arrowhead left, a good size one, they said, but that was hunted for years and never found. So the musket barrel was donated to a museum over in I think in Gainesville first somewhere, and then come up to Tallahassee. We knew it was somewhere, but it got lost. And so this is where his story begins.
It was lost, and I was hunting it, because that was the one part of the story that Granddaddy never could put together. And I hunted all the way, I was well into my 20s, and what I figured out, just tracking it around, was one of the McLane brothers, Frank McLane, went to the University of Florida. Not everybody makes good decisions. And about the time that he would have been 19 years old, the barrel was donated to a museum there in Gainesville, and that was, and then it was lost again. And I tracked it around, and it bounced between a few museums, and then I had tracked it, and this was over the course of a lot of years, y'all, because there's not great records from those time frames. I swore it was in the museum in Tallahassee, and we went back and forth for years about whether or not they had that gun in the museum in Tallahassee, and this is where the trail ends.
It had been
If
tracked.
it's not here, where is it? Like, the trail ends here. And I can't remember the gentleman's name now, but he was the curator of the museum. He got pretty sharp with me one day, and he was tired of me calling and aggravating him. I'd say, I've got another clue, it's there. And he told me, he said, I personally had my hands on every piece in this museum. If it were here, I would know about it. And I said, well, I disagree. I said, how about go look again? And I was climbing up in the tree stand at Grandma and Granddaddy's house, right behind their old house there. I'm about halfway between where they lived and where the old original cabin would have been. And my cell phone rings. The old blue flip phones were the thing then. This is early 2000s. I
Way
answered,
back.
and his voice was much different than it had been the last few phone calls. And he said, you know what? I found a gun barrel in the basement of the museum here, and it's got a label on it with your family's name. Frank McLane, all the other things you've been telling me that it had on it. And I just climbed on down. There was no hunting that day. That was probably about the coolest day. And I ran up to tell Granddaddy I found the gun. And he was sick. So they took it out of storage and allowed us to come over and see it. And that day, it was the first time in almost 100 years that the gun had been out and handled. And me and Daddy and Granddaddy and Bradley were there. So there was 4 generations of us there that day. And we took a picture, and I'll never forget it. And that was the last time Granddaddy Edwards left the house. He died after that. And that is probably the most meaningful interaction that I've ever had, because I grew up listening to him tell that story, folks coming to see the pine knot, all the things, but we found it just in time for him to hold it and see it. And it was that day that we learned from the museum curator that it was a homemade barrel. So the anvil that we had that's shown in the workshop here in the picture is the very anvil that the gun would have
Most
been
likely is the anvil.
most likely created on. And you can look at the barrel here and tell it's homemade. On the end it's thicker in some places and thinner. And that just, I don't know, to me that's been one of the most meaningful things that's ever happened to me in 40 years of life that we.
Hopefully you were persistent.
I was extreme. I knew they had it.
He's been aggravating his whole life.
That's a fact. That's a fact. But I knew he had it when he called me back, because I could tell in the change of his voice. We were no longer enemies. We were friends.
He toted that gun in the Civil War. He was in the infantry, and you know, there towards the end of the Civil War, some of the units had been so decimated that a lot of the Florida units, or most of the Florida units, were assimilated into the Army, the Northern Virginia Army, under Lee, right under him. I mean, all of them were under him. And Harold, I don't know, I've heard this, and you probably have too. I heard most of my life that he was at Appomattox when the surrender.
Yeah, I've heard that.
It's not, Lane Bentley has got some documents that show some of the Florida regiments that were there. I know his granddaddy or great granddaddy was on there listed as being there, and John K. Watton, but we all know that records back then aren't what they are today. But I've heard that my whole life, that he was there at Appomattox when Lee surrendered. But I do know that he was in that, and the Florida units had been whittled down till they were then part of the Army of Northern Virginia. So that's another thing there. But that old gun barrel is traveled. My point is, it's traveled a lot of miles by horse or buggy or whatever.
And I'll tell you something else, if not for the West Gadsden Historical Society, none of us would have eyes on it today, because once we finished looking at it that day, they packed it up and back to the basement it went. And I fought them for a long time, just trying to get it back. I said, listen, we travel to schools, we go all over telling this story. It should be out where people can see it. And their objection was, if college students or somebody comes along and they want to study armory from that time period, they had at that time 5 similar type barrels in the basement over there, and that might be one that they pull out and let somebody study, write a report about. And I said, well, this isn't a mic. I can't believe that you would just leave this in the basement. And like I told you, I was a little fiery about the situation back then, and I had lawyered up and was going to sue them for it. We were going to fight to the bitter end, and the West Gadsden Historical Society stepped in and calmed me down a little bit, first of all. And
Patricia.
Miss Patricia, thank the Lord, and worked with them, and it was a hard battle for them to even get it. And it's on loan. You guys sign it every year, right?
Every year we sign.
Yep.
And letters written, went back and forth. The house down here had to get certain security measures put in. There was a lot of fundraising that went into that. They put a lot of work into not only taking this stuff that I had stored in a storage tote and would just bring out. That is not the way these items really should have been handled. They put all this stuff on display. Every 4th of July, I would come up and I would tote it and talk about it. And they took over that responsibility, and I'm thankful for it. Not just that, but also the fight to get that gun barrel out and get it back
That's
here
right.
in this part of Gadsden County where it belongs, where it's all of our history. It belongs to all of us. It shouldn't be in my house or their basement or anywhere. It should be up
It's
here.
where
They
it
took
needs
on.
to be.
So when she asked for money for that caboose or anything else out here, listen, folks, they have fought for our family's history, and they have put a lot of time and energy into it, and I am eternally grateful. So I'll write you a check, another one I've written for years, but they probably kept me out of jail because I was ready to fight. That gun barrel.
Are there any questions?
I just wanted to say something real quick, it's not a question. I'm from Fort Braden Community, and when we were recently going to lose the name of our community center, we had a dearly beloved principal that passed away. Nobody objected to honoring our beloved principal, but we did object to changing the name of the Fort Braden Community Center to a person's name. And we delved into the history and the fact that the Fort Braden, the soldiers from Fort Braden were called upon because of the McLane Massacre.
How about that?
To come to Greensboro to help rescue these families or
Right.
help with the settling down of the Indians. You know, they had to cross of course, they had to cross the river, and
Right.
it took them a while to get here, but one of the commissioners was called, and she was told the story of the McLane Massacre and the soldiers from Fort Braden and the part that they played in the history, that they revoted and did not change the name of the Fort Braden community.
Well, that's wonderful. Thank you for sharing.
You guys ever metal detected the site?
You used to hunt arrowheads like crazy down there, didn't you? I was more hunting
Yes,
squirrels.
it's been metal detected. It's been metal detected. It's been down through the years. Harold can tell you there's first one and then the other that's metal detected down there.
Planted bees where the old
And
house.
yeah, where the house was, that's what we've done all that. We've planted and picked, and then right up between there and the house was the mule lot. All that, remember that, Harold? I know you do. And,
Every time my granddaddy had a calf and he wasn't growing, granddaddy caught me and Gene riding him. He said, I know the reason now that he ain't growing.
we're talking about he's talking about Gene McDowell, who was the head coach at University of Central Florida for so many years. That was another one of our first cousins. His mother was and Harold's mother was my daddy's sisters.
For years, there was a group that claimed that this never happened. I'm go ahead, but there was claims that this never happened, but Dale has actually sat with the Creek Indian family side of this as well that went on, and whether or not it was the chief's son, I don't know, but that is what John Kay was told back in the late 1800s. This is before he fought in the Civil War. I mean, I don't have any reason to not believe him, but then again, you know.
And one of the reasons that Dale said in his account in sitting with their family was that the Creek Indian War didn't end then. Well, that's not what John Kay says, if my memory serves. The old chief told them back then that the Creek Indian War was shortened because of that. Am I right, Harold?
Would not have ended.
Would not have ended. He didn't say it was ended then. It was shortened and would not have ended about a year later. So it did go on. So we don't know.
Yeah, I think the
But I'm gonna go with our side of it that we've done all these years.
Yeah, the treaty was signed about a year later, and that's when it
Harold's
was
gonna make me.
well, that's when it was said that the chief's son was killed on the banks of Toloja Creek, and if that's so, then there's only one instance of a native warrior being killed on the banks of the Toloja Creek, and that was at the McLane homestead. So, depending on which depiction you hear, I can tell you for a historical fact that was the only account of a warrior being killed here in this part of the state of Florida in that timeline. And he's buried, if any of y'all don't know it, right here at Pine Grove Cemetery. If you go all the way to the back, all the way to the back edge of the woods where you drive that U-shape, right next to the
No, that's his mama and all of in a mass grave. The mama and that's Nancy Jane. That's his mama and the sister and the two infants is buried in a mass grave there. He's buried So, and Pine Grove.
Yeah,
That
there's
you-
some more.
Whose house is identified?
John K. McLane, and she's got a picture of it.
There's a Confederate monument. There's a
Confederate monument, and she's got a book here with some pictures of different things if folks wants to see it after.
I want
Name the names of the children of John K.
the children of John K. We have John Kinsey McLane married Ellen Shepherd. John Kinsey is buried at Pine Grove Cemetery. He does have a Confederate States of America marked tombstone. Ellen also has a tombstone, and she was born in 1829 and died in 1894. They married in 1848 in Gadsden County. Their children were Andrew Daniel, who was born June 28, 1849, Margaret C., who was born in 1851. Andrew Daniel married a Georgia Ann Johnson. Margaret C. married a John Barry O'Brien. And there was Simon Peter. Simon Peter was born in 1853, and he died in 1863. He never married. Nancy Jane married an Adam Peacock. She was born in 1855. John Benjamin was born in 1857. He married an Ida Baldry from Jackson County. Alexander Webster was born in 1860. He married Verena McColeman from Gadsden County. And lastly was Shepherd Allen. He was born in 1863, died in 1925, and he married Martha Margaret, also known as Mattie Peacock.
What year did the house burn?
1840.
No, this happened in 1840. The house burned. She's talking about Alec's house. Uncle Alec, they call
I
it.
don't know.
Daddy was a teenager.
Yeah.
He always remembers seeing
I was
it.
small.
They had the bow and the quiver. Uncle Alec had it over the fireplace at one time.
Right. And I think that it might have been over the fireplace or might have been over the door, but I know the musket was behind the door. It might have been that it was over the fireplace, the musket was behind the door, or they might have moved it over the door. I don't know, but it was one of the two. How was we kin, Mr. Mack?
Huh?
How are we kin in there?
Somebody needs to tell me.
Okay. You can't tell me we in trouble.
I've got a lot of dear friends like the Edwards family.
Yes.
So
Go
I
ahead,
was
Jane.
insistent on finding the 1910 that listed Miss Flavey. And so she was 8 years old in 1910.
1902, yeah.
So
And who was her folks now?
her daddy was Shepherd Allen.
Okay, there we
There's a
go.
preacher down there.
There, that's exactly right. So there we go. Her daddy and Uncle Alec would have been brothers then.
Y'all were all related. Everybody.
Her
knows
daddy,
that.
Shepherd, or was brothers. They was brothers.
There's a question right here.
Okay, yes
I'm just
ma'am.
curious if your family still owns that land for this house.
Part of it we do. We own the he actually now owns it where the monument is, and right up to the edge of where the old house and all used to be, right up to that spot. So on 15 acres in there where the monument is. We kept that to preserve it.
So that was kind of my other life's mission, was to get that back. Granddaddy Edwards, you know, over the years, all that land split off as folks would die. And Gene, I called him Uncle Gene, but my cousin Gene McDowell owned that piece. And when he passed away, I bought that from his son Blake, and that was a long time coming. Blake and I grew up together, and Gene never wanted to get rid of it, but it was kind of an unspoken thing that when he passed, I was gonna buy it, and when he did, I was able to get it back. And I can tell you, one of the first things I did was drive up here to Bethel Cemetery and let Granddaddy know I had it back, and that it was ours again. And there's been a pile of people that goes down there, but that was something I think that Granddaddy worried about for years, that was gonna get lost.
So yeah, we've got that part of it with the monument and everything on that end down there.
It's also fascinating to note, this is the, one of the original deeds to the homestead before everybody in here owns a piece of land there, I think. And it's signed by the president, Millard Fillmore. I guess back in the day, you know, land transactions were a big deal. And, it's on sheepskin. And that's one of the things
Yep.
that's not faded, you make out very well is the president of the United States signature right there on the original, deed to the
Old
property.
homestead deed.
And Kenny and I had talked about trying to set up, when it's cooler and snakes aren't crawling, having a field trip,
And yellow flies.
you know.
And the yellow flies.
And you can bring a covered dish. And we'll have dinner on the ground.
There you go. I'm gonna be perfect. Hey, Harold, they better have their dinner, their dinner on the ground up here instead of down there around them yellow flies.
And to get to that, it's gated.
I went down there a while back and looked at the old monument, I had a time finding it. Do you care if I trim a trail out to it?
No, not at all.
No,
Not at all.
we-
It was way back.
we'll help you do it.
But it's located, if you all know where Shorty Edwards Road is at, right across from
This
Pine
side
Grove
of it.
Church Road, just on this side of it, there's a little two-trail road that goes by where Mr. Harold used to live. I mean, they're side by side. Right at the end of where that road dead ends, and then you walk off into the woods, and it's down to the left. The branch that's mentioned in the story, it starts to get real thick right there, cause you're getting close to that branch that she was trying to cross with the
That
kids.
branch is brother's road out there, just about around it now, ain't it?
Yeah, it's hard to find.
But it's right there. All of this happened just so
We
close.
need to have a day
It's
to
amazing.
clean it up down there and clean that up around there.
Yep.
So which way on Toloja Creek did they go after there?
Went back toward Bristol.
Okay.
If I recall correctly, back toward the Apalachicola River.
Yep.
Yes, ma'am.
So they must have taken the federal road because Toloja goes on down there to Oklahoma, so they must have.
Yes, sir. I know they were headed back toward.
They
the
did,
Apalachicola
they headed
River.
back toward the Apalachicola River, and then I think they turned up into Georgia, somewhere up in that way, where they was raiding a long ways
So they
down
probably
in
came
there.
off the Toloja on that branch you're talking about. 'cause
Yep.
That's
Yes,
the
sir.
thing, is that what y'all think?
Yep,
Yes,
By
sir.
the way, Kenny, they're in Oklahoma, the Creek Indians are.
are all of them in Oklahoma?
There's some in
Ones that were.
Missouri.
I know some of them were,
The ones that were in the Big Bend.
are in Oklahoma, so that's where they at. Somebody else over yonder raised a hand, I thought.
Did y'all have this recorded, Kenneth? Is it on paper or record or?
So there's this right here is the original, or a copy of the original story that was taken down in 1902 when John Kay was 82.
He was elderly and,
He died the next year.
yeah, a reporter / Methodist preacher took this down, this account. Straight
And
from
we
it.
still have the original
Get you
copy
one
right
off
off
when you
the,
start to go
right
to
off
it.
the typewriter.